I was struck, as I'm sure you were, by the comment of the federal judge who first got this lawsuit, which was filed by a number of Democratic attorneys general in states around the country. And they sought to block this. And the judge, a veteran of the federal courts who had actually been appointed decades ago by Ronald Reagan, a very conservative Republican, of course, in his time, wrote that it was a, quote, blatantly unconstitutional order. And, the sense of this jurist being just profoundly almost offended by the legal case that Trump was presenting is a reminder that this is basically a crackpot legal theory that has no bearing. There's really not a lot of serious legal commentary that thinks that the Constitution's guarantee of birthright citizenship isn't a guarantee of birthright citizenship.
Hello friends, and welcome back to Highly Conflicted, where we unpack the news inside Trump world and what might be coming down next, now at the White House. Donald Trump has completed an extraordinary return to power as the 47th president, vowing to impose his vision and realtering the political and cultural landscape of the nation. He started off his second term with a dizzying array of executive orders that included pardoning more than 1,500 people convicted on January 6 Capitol riot charges. He attempted to end birthright citizenship and is now seeing whether he can shutter FEMA, the Federal Emergency and Management Agency, and directing the Justice Department to investigate the prosecutors who came after him. In doing so, Trump started the process of ushering in a new era in Washington, where he and his allies intend to push the boundaries of presidential power and bring executive branch agencies close to the White House as part of his sweeping agenda to remake the federal government. That's different from what some of his predecessors have done. For instance, previous Republican presidents and vice presidents have tried to find ways to expand presidential power by wrestling away control from Congress. Trump's plan is different. It's about bringing the power of the agencies, whether it's DOJ, the Department of Defense, or DHS, under the umbrella of the West Wing. And we're already seeing some of this in action. Trump's executive order on ending the weaponization of the government involves using the incoming Attorney General Pam Bondi to conduct an internal investigation and report her findings to the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy at the White House. That's an unusual departure from standard practice for the Attorney General to do what is essentially a misconduct investigation, which is notable in and of itself. But the Attorney General is now considered in the Trump White House to be junior to a political appointee, in this case, Stephen Miller. So, to understand the shifting power dynamics around the White House and the DOJ, as well as Trump using executive orders to try and wipe away decades of legal precedent, I'm joined by Susan Glasser, who is a staff writer at The New Yorker, who has covered Trump for a long time and co-wrote The Divider, the best-selling book about Trump's first term. Susan, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for being here. Looking forward to it.
So I just want to jump right into what we had on Friday, because there was a lot of news on Friday when the Trump administration fired dozens of inspectors general across several cabinet level agencies, including, State, Department of Defense. And the admin justified it by saying they were fired for cause and they didn't need to tell Congress as part of the 30-day notice requirement because they viewed that requirement as unconstitutional. And I guess my first question is, do you think we will see that sort of excuse being used over and over again as Trump tries to trample through what have been the norms and I guess policies of these various agencies?
Yeah, I think, look, right out of the gate, and we're talking on just the very first week anniversary, the 1 week anniversary of this administration here, so we're early days. And I think out of the gate, what you're seeing is a real determination to push the boundaries of what an executive can do. So it's not just having the very expansive definition of executive power and deciding to use more executive orders than other presidents have in the past. No one's disputing they have that power. What Trump and his team are doing is to actually say, well, we're just going to make claims about the laws in a way that I think is very different from other presidents. And if you get in a situation where there is a sort of a pick and choose your own adventure approach to laws, well, I'll obey these, but not these. And by the way, this is very consistent with Trump. So I do expect that that's not a one-off. Congress explicitly passed the 30-day notice rule that you're talking about with regard to the inspector generals as a response to the first Trump term, when he was often threatening the independence of the inspectors general. So this was a new provision passed by Congress when Trump was out of office in the hopes of constraining him. And the other thing was that you're supposed to have a cause for firing the inspector general, not just saying, well, I don't like that person, or I don't think that they are loyal to me personally. That's not sufficient cause under the way that the federal rules have been interpreted for a law like that. So I think it's a harbinger of things to come.
And it's interesting what you say about needing cause. I feel like Trump on the campaign trail and elsewhere has always come up with whatever excuse he needs to come up with to justify whatever course of action he's going to take. And I think immediately back to the first term when Trump fired Comey as the FBI director, and initially said it was because the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, said I could just fire him because he was bad at his job. And then the next day he came out and said, well, actually it was because of the Russia investigation. And I guess that was when Trump was less adept at using excuses for cover. But I feel like this time around, he's not even trying to find cover. He's just going ahead and doing whatever he wants.
Yes, again, this goes with the maximalist interpretation of a president's powers. He's now surrounded by advisors who are much more united in the view, the very controversial legal view that essentially many of the constraints that are imposed upon the executive branch, they believe actually should not really apply to a president who's determined to do them. And, Trump and his advisors believe if he wants to fire anybody in the executive branch, he ought to be able to do so and basically dare people to take him to court, dare the courts to overrule him. And that is applying as well to the issue of congressional laws. And I would just point out, because I think this is really significant, that you're going to see him flout it when it comes to hiring laws by Congress, but also when it comes to the content of laws. And remember that the reason Trump was impeached the first time, before January 6th, the first time he was impeached, it was because he took the very controversial view that he could hold up nearly, hundreds of millions of dollars in security assistance to Ukraine that had been passed by Congress, that had been specified for this cause to help Ukraine, and that he could hold that money up because he wanted a personal political favor. And the architect of that strategy was Russell Vought, at the time his director of management and budget, and Mick Mulvaney, at the time his acting White House chief of staff. Well, Vought is back. You may remember him as the architect of the Project 2025 suggested guidebook for what a Trump second term could do. And I think they're going to use this theory of the case to basically say, yeah, well, so what if Congress passed a bill and appropriated these funds for a specific cause? Maybe we'll follow that, and maybe we won't.
Yeah, and then actually the Ukraine call brings it all full circle, because Trump's dislike for inspectors general, as far as we have reported, started around that time because it was Michael Atkinson, then the ICIG, the Inspector General for the intelligence community, that ended up transmitting the whistleblower complaint to Congress that kicked off the first impeachment. So there's a lot of sensitive areas for Trump there. But I wanted to get into what you mentioned about the courts, because one of his executive orders is already subject to a legal challenge, and that's the EO on trying to end birthright citizenship. And, this was something he mused about in his first term. Infamously, I think it was in his interview with Axios with Jonathan Swan, when he talked about, that was something he wanted to explore doing, but he never ultimately got around to pushing it. And right out of the gate, this time around, this is one of the first things that he does. And I guess I'm curious to get your take on whether this represents a different shift or a different era or a different mentality for Trump when it comes to birthright citizenship in particular.
Yeah, look, first of all, you know very well that Trump views the courts as an extension of political warfare. And so even if he doesn't win a lawsuit on the merits or, prevail legally, he may still see it worthwhile politically or personally. He's been using the courts for, warfare long before he entered politics. And, I often think back to a memorable quote of his about a lawsuit that he ended up losing when he was a private businessman. And he said, yeah, but I screwed the guy. I made him have to pay all this money for years and to, be tied down. And so I think looking at what's the political utility for Donald Trump, as well as looking at, his legal chances to prevail in this case is important. I was struck, as I'm sure you were, by the comment of the federal judge who first got this lawsuit, which was filed by a number of Democratic attorneys general in states around the country. And they, sought to block this. And the judge, a veteran of the federal courts who had actually been appointed decades ago by Ronald Reagan, a very conservative Republican, of course, in his time, wrote that it was a, quote, blatantly unconstitutional order. And, the sense of this jurist being just profoundly almost offended by the legal case that Trump was presenting is a reminder that this is basically a crackpot legal theory that has no bearing. There's really not a lot of serious legal commentary that thinks that the Constitution's guarantee of birthright citizenship isn't a guarantee of birthright citizenship. This is something that seems like almost a messaging lawsuit as much as anything for Donald Trump, a sense to say to his most hardcore anti-immigration supporters, hey, look, we're trying here. And I think that's a classic kind of Trump tactic at this point in time, which is when in doubt, why not give a shot to the most extremist outcome? Because who knows, you might actually succeed. And we've seen with some of the court cases that worked out for Donald Trump actually quite well on a personal level, right? He luck of the draw meant that he drew perhaps the most sycophantic pro-Trump judge in the federal judiciary for his classified documents case, and that made a big difference. So he might prevail, and even if he doesn't, he's accomplished something politically by doing this at the very outset of his presidency.
On that point, do you think he actually is interested in ending birthright citizenship? I mean, is there a personal motivation for him? When you wrote The Divider, which is an excellent book and everyone should read, but when you wrote that and as part of your reporting, did that ever kind of come up as a thing? Was there ever a through line into what Trump was looking at policy-wise with immigration, that was a driving, motivating factor for him?
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously, under birthright citizenship, this is a man who has 2 foreign wives, so look, Donald Trump is not a policy wonk. He's not sitting around, drawing up, elaborate programs for this presidency. It was, however, as you said, a through line. It came up not just the few times it would pop up publicly, but this was something that they debated amongst themselves, among the Trump advisors throughout his first term in office. And there are certain immigration hawks, including especially Stephen Miller, who has been sort of his immigration policy czar throughout this whole period, who favor much more extreme measures. And I think they're the ones who keep putting this back onto the agenda. The difference this time is it's not clear what, if any, moderates there are. Perhaps those moderates will emerge from the ranks of some of the business people that Trump has enlisted, either officially or informally, in the new administration. Will his new Treasury Secretary, who comes from Wall Street, will he be a moderating force on immigration? I don't know. But historically, certainly, Wall Street has had a different view of immigration than Stephen Miller has had of it. Same thing you could say with Elon Musk and this early fight among him and his cadre over the H-1B visas for skilled immigrants. But that's a very niche subject. I think Donald Trump thinks immigration is a winning issue for him. I don't know that he cares about the details all that much.
And the other executive order I wanted to get to, because it's all kind of the same vein, but this is more on the retribution side of it, I guess, is his executive order to shut down FEMA. and he's had a turbulent relationship with that agency before. He likes the idea of using it as a cudgel and restricting aid sometimes, but then when it suits him, he thinks FEMA is an impediment to his agenda. What is going on with FEMA as far as you can tell? I mean, is this just an agency that he dislikes, or what is the situation there?
Well, first of all, I should say Donald Trump is not going to be shutting down FEMA. So let's be clear on that. He does not have the power to do that. And, he and his lawyers maybe can argue about whether this or that individual earmark for Ukraine aid can be held up at the whim of the president. But FEMA is an agency created by Congress, authorized by Congress, and legislatively that exists. And we do not have a king, at least not yet in this country, and he does not have the power to wave his magic wand or throw, a pile of paper towels in the air and say that, he's done with FEMA. So I think that's important to say. You should also point out that he's been lying in a most extraordinary fashion about what FEMA did or did not do in North Carolina and Florida after the hurricanes of last fall and the hurricane season, purely because it happened to coincide with the electoral season in the U.S., and he wanted votes from those states that turned out to be, once again, pretty reliably Republican states, both North Carolina and Florida. So, he's sort of...
And also battleground states.
Yeah, exactly. Well, not battleground states in the case of Florida anymore.
Right.
But, basically, he's just lying through his teeth. So, again, what are you doing? You're signaling, you're messaging to your base. This is not one that I expect there to be a real follow through on. Trump has a penchant, as we've already seen in just his first week back into office, of like floating pretty outrageous, kind of trial balloons. And one of the tricks, I think we're all Trumpologists now again, right, is decoding, well, what do we make of those things? I do think he's a firm believer in assistance that can be as politicized as possible. He and his advisors basically have a view of the executive branch where almost everything should flow through the White House, where independent, or expertise or science-driven things, or, having the idea of having a cadre of federal emergency experts in this country who know how to respond to things. They want to politicize even that, number one. Number two, remember that FEMA also has a sort of convergence with the question of climate change. And if you're expecting an increase in climate-related disasters in the country, which of course all independent experts are, then comes the question, well, how are you going to fund that? How are you going to plan for that? Whatever. So you're taking two hyper-politicized things and, merging them into the sphere of Donald Trump. So I'm not surprised that he's targeted FEMA, but it's, it doesn't bode well for the folks at that agency, even if he doesn't have the ability to eliminate it.
And then the last EO that I really wanted to get to, because, this is an area that we've been tracking for a while, and it's much more direct about his personal grievances, was the attorney general being deputized to effectively conduct what is a misconduct investigation or it's kind of a fishing expedition a little bit to find instances of bias against kind of conservatives or Republicans, whether that's to do with school boards, but also on Trump's personal issues. And this was kind of hinted in the language a little bit, is to do with effectively his January 6th prosecution. And I want to tap into your deep knowledge of this and kind of previous administrations. Have you ever seen an executive order where the attorney general is tasked with completing a report to a deputy chief of staff for policy?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is so unusual that it's hard to, kind of unpack it for me. I mean, look, one thing that we have to conclude from that particular EO and all of them last week is that when Trump on the campaign trail said that, retribution and, essentially vengeance were going to be on his agenda, he meant it. And I think you're seeing that the Justice Department in particular will be a focus of the efforts by the White House to, go after opponents, to both in a backward looking way and also in a forward looking way. It's again a vision of extreme politicization. There have already been reports in the first few days of moving career attorneys who have real expertise in places like the National Security Division of the Justice Department, moving them to other agencies that might be looking at part of the immigration crackdown, for example. And so, the trend of A, politicization, but B, weaponization of the Justice Department. Trump does this mirroring thing, right, where he accuses often his enemies and opponents of doing exactly that which he himself is seeking to do. And in the first Trump term, when we looked at this and interviewed, again, Trump's own appointees, often the sources of the most damaging stories about him and, what he's done. And the Trump appointees, again, many Republicans whom we spoke with, were very clear that even in his first term, Trump was seeking to use the machinery of the Justice Department to investigate opponents, to charge them in courts, or to go lighter on those who were charged, who were favorable to him, and essentially had a vision of himself being at the helm of the Justice Department in a way that sort of erased the entire notion of an independent justice system in this country.
But at least in the first admin, he tried to at least keep the perception that the Justice Department was independent, right? Like, he wanted to use the legitimacy and the credibility and the weight of the Justice Department and be like, look, DOJ is investigating whether it's, I don't know, let's say the election fraud thing. He wanted Bill Barr to come out and say, yes, DOJ is investigating election fraud, because then he could point to that and say, oh, look, DOJ is investigating. It's not me getting involved. DOJ has announced that by itself. And I feel like, and maybe we're not there yet, but we seem to be on this path towards him even dropping the pretense of wanting an arm's length distance with DOJ. And it's more about having the Attorney General essentially do the White House's bidding.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting distinction you're drawing. I guess we'll have to see. But that example you used of Bill Barr is a very interesting one to me, because to me, what that was doing was that Donald Trump wanted the Attorney General and the Justice Department to be an extension of his attack on the 2020 election. And Barr, in that instance, said, no, there is no basis for widespread fraud allegations, and we're not going to pursue that. And then made that statement publicly to the, ire of Trump, and then quit the administration. To me, that is an example of one of the most straightforward potential abuses of power that Donald Trump ever tried to commit. And what's notable is that he came as close as just one attorney general away. And Pam Bondi, by hiring someone who'd already worked as his personal lawyer, he's changed the terms of the job description. So my fear is not that Donald Trump is changing in his desire to misuse the Justice Department, because I believe that he had that desire already in the first term, and that there were examples actually where Barr went over the line in doing things that Donald Trump demanded that he probably shouldn't have done. But my fear is that it's not that Trump has changed, but that the people who are taking jobs now in this second administration, the terms of the job offer have changed. And Pam Bondi isn't going to stand up to Donald Trump, even in the way that Bill Barr at least occasionally did when it mattered.
And we should all remember that Pam Bondi was one of the 3 people at Four Seasons Total Landscaping, along with Rudy Giuliani, leading the charge on the 2020 election result reversal effort. She wasn't part of the Kraken team, but she was there with Rudy and the Kraken lady herself. And so I feel like maybe this is a bad omen for what's to come, but we shall have to see. Susan Glasser, thank you for being with us.
Great to be with you, Hugo. Thank you.